Welcome to Suncoast In Depth Podcast. I'm Brett Watson, and today I am joined by my good buddy, Ryan Baucom.
Hey.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I started this series. This is, the fourth one, I think. And I did it because, my group on Sunday, I keep running into people, and on social media, you see it all over the place, people deconstructing. And what bothers me is the tendency for many to deconstruct their faith, which is a really difficult process, right? And then throw out the baby Jesus with the bathwater. And I know that you have a unique experience with deconstructing your faith and reconstructing something. So why don't you we'll start off with you telling us something about the journey of going to atheist and then fundamentalist. Just kidding.
I was going to say, I don't know if I've hit either of those. I'm thinking, maybe. I would say, I'm the pastor of Suncoast Sun, so I grew up with a pastor as a father, and then I went to a Christian school. And the Christian school I went to was very fundamentalist, like literally as fundamentalist as you can get probably locally.
Hardcore.
Yeah. And so we had chapel there. I went from kindergarten till 11th grade. Then I transferred out my senior year. And chapel every week. We had to memorize Bible verses. We had Bible class every day, that kind of thing.
Wait, you went there till 11th grade?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know they did high school.
Well, I left because there was one other guy in my class and 3 other girls. That's what my graduating class would have been.
Wow.
So the school really, I think they really did well in elementary as far as their reading program and grammar and everything. But as it got into high school, it just kind of got progressively worse, and the teachers sort of left. And that's where I met Kevin O'Hara, obviously. Mm-hmm. I don't think I really had him as a teacher, but he subbed in occasionally, and we all knew him as as Kevin. As anybody that knows him knows.
Yeah.
He's a character.
Yeah. He just got back in town yesterday.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so you had that experience. So how was that different? What did you run into that was so different at school, chapel time, versus what you got at home?
Yeah, the thing I would get at school was definitely more hellfire, brimstone. Occasionally we'd have that guest speaker pastor that would come in and walk up and down the aisles and spit and scream and do all that. But just, a large emphasis on the Bible and on the, Jesus coming and atoning for your sins in a specific way, and how you need to say a very specific thing in order to not go to hell. And so that was kind of mostly what I remember is that sort of narrative was you're a sinner, you need Jesus, and you have to say these specific words, then you have Jesus, and then now you don't go to hell forever and ever. But also, if you don't witness to all your friends and family and get them saved, their blood is on your hands as well. So that was like a little added bonus.
Yeah.
But to say that, and then I went to my family church, obviously, which it wasn't always Suncoast. My dad pastored other churches, and that was a lot different because we really didn't have that. But a lot of the terminology was the same, so it was interesting as I got older to kind of see the difference between the two things that I was participating in, because both are obviously talking about God and Jesus, but ultimately just kind of landing in different places in a lot of ways. So that kept me somewhat open, I would say. Maybe partially why I'm as open to different ideas and things as I am is because I had a family and a father that was more on this side, and then the school I went to was more on this side, and so I just kind of saw things from multiple angles, I would say.
Yeah. I had kind of a similar experience. I didn't go to school. I wasn't raised Christian, but I started my ministry in a Lutheran church.
Right.
So they were both highly educated pastors and, what people would label as liberal theologically. And, but then I was heavily influenced by especially the charismatic movement going on at the time, the renewal movement. It was like a revival kind of that was taking place in the 90s.
Gotcha.
Heavily charismatic and very conservative theologically. politically and all that.
Sure.
And so I was heavily influenced by that, but I also had this influence. And so I ended up with like you're saying, a kind of very open view on things. So I'm actually grateful for both.
Yeah, I don't have any ill will towards the school that I was brought up in or my parents' choice to send me to such a wild place. I think ultimately I'm happy for the experience and happy that I kind of was able to grow up the way that I did. I mean, it's all been fine. It's been good ultimately.
So would you say that the experience with the school caused any kind of trauma for you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, when you're telling a little kid things like that, that's not probably the best thing to be instilling in a really, really young, impressionable mind. Just this insistence on fear, not just for you, but for everybody. And then, if you have a bad thought and you die in the car wreck, like what happens then? And you're just constantly kind of plagued with that fear of hell and death, and not just for you, but for everybody around you. So I wouldn't say that was great, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger and all that.
Okay. So that's what I was going to ask you. So that's interesting, right? You had some trauma, understandably, from that experience, but you can still look back without animosity and ultimately call it all good.
Well, I mean, it hasn't always been that way, I would say. There's been a lot of times that I've looked back and been frustrated, periods of my life where I was looking for someone or something to blame whatever my issues were at that time. And I think a lot of times I would kind of point it back at that because it was an easy target. And there may be some validity there that that thing was to blame for some of the anxieties or the fears that I've struggled with later in life. But I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah.
To say my dad's favorite saying.
Yeah, I'll be so proud.
Yeah.
Right. So it almost certainly is legitimate to look back and say there's some blame there. But that's not really the point of not looking back with animosity, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's more for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that it's like I'm not responsible for the things that happened to me when I was a little kid, but I am responsible for who I am and the decisions that I make today. I think I heard Carl Lentz say that. He's doing well now, huh?
Yeah.
He's poor Carl.
Yeah, that's fair.
Poor Carl.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you identify a place in your journey that seems at least pivotal for your deconstruction?
Pivotal
or most pivotal?
I mean, obviously, I think it's hard to say what the cause is, right? I can point to a time in my life, and I could point to a bunch of things that happened around 2000, anywhere from like 2009 to 2018, I would say would be the majority of the time that I spent kind of figuring things out, which really is when I became an adult and when I started out on my own and when I was heavily involved in working at a church and leading worship every weekend. And so there was a lot of things in that time, dating people, getting married, like all these different things that happened simultaneously. And then obviously what happened with the church in 2016 with like the whole upset, which just made me dive deeper into, okay, what is this? And yeah, I wouldn't say there was one moment or one thing, but just a continual conversation. One of the benefits of living in the same house with my dad growing up was that there were constant conversations. I was constantly hearing talk because he's a pastor, and I hear him on the weekends, and then we have dialogue and things like that during the week. So I never felt like...
And having permission.
Yeah, that was one thing that I think I was really fortunate to have, was a family and even a community where I could just be honest and be myself, and I never really thought much about it. I didn't worry about saying the wrong thing and then getting outcast. And I hear a lot of people say that, and I used to think like, oh yeah, I had that too. But when I look back, I'm like, I really never had that. I never had the fear of like losing my family over questions of faith or anything like that. So I'm really fortunate to have had that kind of on my side.
What do you mean you don't know anybody else, or lots of people rather say that they've had that too?
Yeah, I have friends that, if they would be honest about what they think about their faith or about questions that they have or whatever even with their family, if their family found out they had those questions or they were entertaining these ideas, they would be very, very worried for them at least, and maybe even kind of push them away at worst. And
not know what to do with them, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've known a lot of people that have suffered that. I have suffered some of that. To this day, my the middle child, my sister, because of her fundamentalism and because of my divorce, we have very little. It's gotten better, but there used to be no contact. No contact. I don't know her kids.
Oh, that's crazy.
She lives in Sarasota. I don't know her kids. They don't know me. And they chose not to associate with me because I was a sinner. But anyway,
that's really sad.
I have experienced some of that. The rest of my family, there's no issue, but with her, so it's interesting. I think that you have that combination, right?
Right.
And ultimately, it's her religious convictions that created that, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably a bunch of things.
It probably is a bunch of things. Yeah, I guess, and that's good to say. But
the religious convictions aren't helping.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, at minimum, it provided an excuse for cutting me off. But I'll be honest, I have no idea why she would want to cut me off. I got along good with her and with her husband. We were friends, So I don't know.
Well, that's kind of the weird thing, right? Like, I've seen people in my family that have lost people very, very close to them due to, what people would say is religious differences or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's super sad. I haven't lost anybody super close to me. I mean, I've lost friends and, decent friends, but nobody super, super close to me due to religious differences, with the exception of one mentor that I had. That was a rough one for sure. Just a moment of sitting down, somebody that I grew up with who really taught me a lot and was my mentor for 10 plus years, and just was like, hey, if we're not on the same page on these things, like, I don't know how we're good. I was like, how can, what is this? What do these things have to do with our relationship?
Yeah.
What do my thoughts or questions or whatever have to do with this relationship?
Yeah.
But again, I don't think it was due to the religious stuff. I just think that's an excuse in some ways for people that are hurt by other things or dealing with their own things to kind of, they have a reason now to separate.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those things are always tough. And like I said, I'm really fortunate that I haven't had a large amount of those stories with family like you have, or some of my other friends have, where they're genuinely concerned to talk about this out loud, that it should get back to their parents, and then there would be like a major issue in their family life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's got to be so hard. So there's probably a lot of people out there that have deconstructed, but are just in the closet about it for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, who can blame them?
No,
and honestly, a lot of where I've changed over the years, I'm 36 now, and when I started kind of going down this road, it was in my 20s. And when you're in your 20s, you're clever and you're a little bit smart and you think you know everything. And, you like to get around your buddies or whomever and have a discussion and kind of tear down their system of belief a little bit.
Yeah.
And the older I've gotten, I'm like, that's a terrible thing to do to people. That's a terrible thing.
You were so good at it.
What
though.
kind of psychopath, So I've really tried to, and unfortunately I've seen the damage that's done. like over the years, going back and even with close friends that I've had or have, and seeing kind of where some of the things that I've said has torn down some of their faith, and then they lost it, and then now they're without it and they're flailing, or they don't have anything to ground to. They don't have, it's like everything they once understood or thought is gone, and that's not good either.
Right.
And so it's a really tricky thing to kind of bridge the gap between, yeah, you should have the ability to ask questions and have conversations, but I don't want to be the one to decimate your faith if it's something that's benefiting you. Now, I do think that it's good for everybody to struggle and to question. I think that was one of the things Chase was saying this weekend. You know, he's talking about how Israel means the one who struggles with God or something like that. And
it actually has a dual meaning.
Oh, enlighten
It's
me.
one who wrestles with and one who reigns with.
Really?
Yeah.
That Hebrew, man.
I know.
It always gets you.
Pretty cool, though, right?
Yeah, that's really cool. But I'll stick to the wrestling for now because the other one would take some thought, I guess, to unpack. But I do think that that's kind of that's the sign of being somebody who is a Christian or a person that is in the Christian faith, is that you have to have some wrestling with God. Like, that's our heritage. It's not just to accept whatever you were given at 5 years old and bring that with you for the rest of your life. It's like, okay, well, let's question these things. Let's pull these things apart. Let's look at them. But yeah, like I said, I'm just fortunate that I haven't had a huge amount of upset when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah. You did have, though, not the loss of close people in your life, but you had a lot of fingers pointing at you.
Yeah, that sucks.
2016.
That was no fun.
Yeah.
That sent me into a pretty deep, sad spiral, I would say.
No doubt.
And made me really, in a lot of ways, give up on the whole endeavor, I would say. Like, there was definitely a
The
point
whole endeavor of
just Christianity.
Okay.
Just seeing the hypocrisy and, like, you know, the fruits of people that are, I guess you could just say, rotten fruit. Like, you know, Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits, and then you see some of this stuff come out and you go, this is garbage. Like, I don't want anything to do with this. And so, yeah, there was definitely a huge chunk of time that I just felt like the whole thing was kind of worthless and wasn't beneficial, and in a lot of ways was silly and was just ideological and divisive. And I still think that to a degree, I would say.
Okay.
But over the past few years, I've definitely come to a place that I feel there is something worth holding on to. And, you know, we've used the analogy of the bricks. Like, you know, you take a brick out and then that whole wall crumbles, and you take a foundational brick out, theologically speaking, over here, and the whole wall crumbles. And eventually you're kind of left with this just pile of bricks and this big pile of rubble. And it's a lot easier to tear something down than it is to build something up. And that's why I love this. I love that you're calling this reconstruction, like, and trying to look at people and how they're able to maybe pick up some of those bricks and evaluate them and say, do those need to be, this one is still good. It needs to go back into something. It has to be built back up.
Yeah, actually what I tried to do here is, you know, the ruins, right, are the kind of the picture of they represent the institutional side of things, and the bricks that your dad talks about that are, you know, different theological bricks in the walls that we set up, and contrast that with the living picture of the bush that's not consumed.
Oh, I didn't even see that. That's cool.
So a faith that is sustainable, even though it goes through fire.
Yeah.
So reconstructing something that can go through fire,
right,
and you're better for it, and doesn't have the effect of just crumbling all around you and leaving you in this demolished state.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the meaning behind that picture. I guess I hadn't talked about that.
I like it.
Yeah, thanks. So, do you remember any certain bricks in that wall that your dad talks about that were more difficult than others to pull out and watch things fall? Was that a thing for you, or?
No, not really. I don't know whether there's just some people, there's different personality traits and types. If you put those words together, it's tripes. Different.
It's good. Yeah.
And I think that I'm pretty high in openness, so I don't have much of a dilemma about looking at things through fresh eyes. Like I don't have such hangups or such like strong connections to beliefs necessarily that like I have to keep this one. I can't look at it. I can't whatever. So I don't remember anything major that was like hard to evaluate or to pull out and look at. But I would say that a lot of the things that I easily let go of, I have gone back now and tried to pick up and look at and say, okay, what is valuable here? Because one of the things that I've realized is when you're talking to somebody that's more evangelical or fundamentalist, they have a very strong conviction on the things that they're holding on to. And the question kept coming to me like, why is that? Why is it that this person has this incessant need to have this one thing be non-negotiable?
Yeah.
Why do those like dogmas exist inside of this? What is it that's resonating deeply with them? Mm-hmm. And I do think that even the idea of hell, it's like some people hold on so strongly to the idea of like a literal forever burning with no exit plan. Like that's like their specific thing that they can't get over.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why that? Why is that so important? What is it about that? And I think that there is something deep in that, like deeply important that you don't want to lose because it's something that motivates you to stay away from things that will take you to the worst place possible and not just cause suffering for you, but for, the rest of your lineage, all your kids and grandkids and all the people in your community. Like you can make things really, really bad forever, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's something really, really deep there that it's kind of like a semantical game. You're playing like this imaginary theoretical game of, oh, well, it's not a real place. Okay, but maybe it's this annihilation that happens versus this. Or maybe there's a back door there where you can get out if you confess once you go to hell or what. And all that to me just kind of got like boring and a little nonsensical because I'm like, what does it matter? And we can't know. But I think that that's the trap is if you get to that point where you go, it doesn't matter and we can't know. So like whatever. And then you just dismiss the whole thing. And to me, I'm like, there's a reason that's resonating so deeply with mm-hmm. people. And I think it's because there is something deeply true there. Mm-hmm. It may not be true in the way that they're professing it to be true, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some sort of truth buried deep underneath it. And so just looking at things like that and saying, okay, why is this such a big thing? And how could I agree with the underlying truth without having to deal with the literalism that comes along with it? And can we build some sort of bridge there? So when they talk, they being anybody that's overly religious or that I wouldn't line up with technically on beliefs or whatever, how can I find that deep truth? And then when they speak in their terms, be able to track with them and get somewhere productive. Not to change their mind, but just to hear about their experience or hear what their convictions are or what their ideas are. All of that can come if you can try to find that sort of agreement, even if they don't know that you're not taking everything that they say literally, but you're kind of doing it behind the scenes symbolically or in a deeper way. So that's been a big turning point, is to try to figure out how to do that so that I can be sort of bilingual in the religious circles that I still somehow am accepted in.
Which is why it's probably why you've had success in maintaining those relationships and where your openness is so valuable. Mm. I think you're dead on, man. The underlying truth, or the pattern that's always true, is what Rohr calls it.
Yeah.
That's the value of myth. Mm. And the mythology behind hell, even in its more recent form, which is this eternal torment thing that you're describing, yeah, I think you're right. I think it strikes a chord with people subconsciously.
Yes.
That says, I have to have something that motivates me to be afraid of the things that can lead me to, at least in this lifetime, eternal consequences I don't want.
Yeah.
In this lifetime, eternal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I do think that there's problems that come along with that viewpoint, obviously. I mean, I don't think we need to get into the issues that come from it, but nonetheless, to be productive and to be able to be in communion with those people still, it's valuable, I feel, to be able to have some way of reinterpreting what they're saying in a way that you can get somewhere in the conversation.
Do you think that, so for me, obviously I don't believe in a literal eternal torment situation for people that don't accept Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, right? And I know you don't think this is valuable, but I do think it's valuable to know the history.
I'm not saying it's not valuable to know the history.
Okay.
I think it is valuable.
Okay, so I must have misunderstood you.
What I was really saying was I just get tired of the continual banter about.
I think hell is actually this.
Right, exactly. The theoretical things of the.
No, I like that too, though.
And I liked it for a while. We've had enough conversations to know that. I don't say I don't like it. I said I've grown tired of it. You get to a point where you're we're just spinning in circles now. Let's do something productive.
Right. No, agreed. No, I get tired of it too in that sense. So that's fair. But is there value in dialoguing that way too?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that it's good to try to think of things that are bigger than you. I think it's good to contemplate, to use the traditional churchy kind of stuff. Good to contemplate the things of God. And it's good to contemplate the things of Christianity and that worldview, because I do think that, one, it's here for a reason. Not in the sense that it's here because it has some divine purpose down the road. I don't mean it like that. I mean that there's a bunch of things that have happened that have led us to this place that we have, the religion that we have, and that we grew up with it in the West. And I think that...
And the tremendous influence it's had.
The tremendous benefit it's had.
And benefits, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could argue that we wouldn't have science if it wasn't for Christianity. We wouldn't have had the Enlightenment.
Hospitals.
We wouldn't have had a lot of things if it wasn't for this long running religion. Now, is it different than it was in the first? Of course it is. How could we know the minds of the people in the first century, really? How do we know the minds of the people in tribal cultures? It would take so much just to try to get that understanding, then to be able to read things through that lens and understand them in the original language. There's just so much there. And so for me, it's okay, we're here. We have only so much time to live and to do things. Let's try to make the most of it, and let's try to do it in a way that we don't accidentally stumble and fall into a pit, but we find our way avoiding those pits. And a lot of that comes with looking back at the history and the religion and saying hey, there's some wisdom here that will help you. If you incorporate this into your life, it will help you avoid those pits. But the issue that I've run into, or that I think a lot of people that are, again, a 20-year-old clever person runs into, is that you go, oh, well, you think a snake was talking in the garden 6,000 years ago? And it's the whole thing's nonsense. But really, there's a difference between being smart, clever, and wise. And I think that, you shouldn't have...
educated and wise.
Sure. And you shouldn't have to check your intelligence to have any sort of religion in your life. But you also shouldn't just disregard all of religion because you feel like you're
too
smart.
Educated for it.
Yeah. I think you're missing, like you said, you're throwing out the baby Jesus with the bathwater.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely people shouldn't have to check their intelligence at the door when they go to church or to temple or whatever. Because these stories... It's really actually pretty clear when you do get a little education around the scriptures. You don't have to trust me, saying this, but you can look into it for yourself if you want to spend the time on it. But those stories do contain immense wisdom. When Jordan Peterson did his biblical series, right?
Yeah.
And kind of taking apart the psychological value, the mythological value of these stories, he packed auditoriums.
Yeah.
To listen to a prof kind of ramble about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Brilliantly ramble.
For like 40 hours.
My God, right? So there's definitely, there are definitely people out there that have like this inner sense that there's something valuable there.
Yeah.
And there's ways to get at that. And, the talking snake in the garden isn't just a fable about a talking snake in the garden. It wasn't even written in a way like the genre of literature.
Right.
It's clearly meant to be conveying mythological truth that you can take hearing the story and apply it to your life regardless of what time and culture you're in.
Right.
Yeah.
But
you got to be willing to be open enough to read it that way.
Yeah. Well, and then the problem is it just goes deeper and deeper. Like once you take off that literalism and you start going into that story, the story gets infinitely deep.
It does.
And then it will just stick with you in all times and places that you are.
Yeah.
I mean, I was
different circumstances you run into in your life. All of a sudden, there's the story.
I mean, today I was driving here and I was like, okay, I'm going to go talk to Brett. And I get a little concerned about. I don't do these things very often, and I don't really talk publicly very often anymore, just because I've been flippant in the past and a little incautious, and I feel like in that I've caused damage inadvertently. And so I'm a little more careful about what I think and how I go about talking about it. And so as I'm driving here, I'm thinking about the fact that I'm going in front of cameras and going to be on YouTube where, whoever can watch it. And I feel naked in a lot of ways. And I feel like, and I immediately went back to the garden story where I'm like naked in the garden and I'm about to be basically observed and seen by everyone and everything. God himself can look down and see my shame and my humility. But in the same sense, I'm like, well, that's what I need to do. That's what I should do. Life is not about staying in the garden. Life is about going and being vulnerable and being, finding humility and finding those times to do that so that you can come out of it and build something better, to build something greater.
And maybe even to build a garden.
Right.
So I use your dad's analogy of the brick wall, right? And thinking about my own deconstruction and others in using that analogy, I see Reconstruction as like a building of a garden. There might be a wall because some boundaries are okay,
Yeah.
But it's a low wall. It's a place where friends can get together and dialogue, sip tea, whatever, eat a scone. I like English gardens.
That's fine.
Anyway, so that's kind of what I see. I don't know if that's completely, accurate for reality. I don't know, but
well, that is kind of
now.
That is kind of like the archetypal paradise, right? It's a walled garden.
Yes.
And you build it, and then you end up leaving again, and then it's a cyclical pattern that never ends in a way.
You're not locked in like Apple.
Right.
You're locked into Apple's walled garden.
Yeah.
And Android's walled garden. No, why am I going there?
I was going to say, it always comes back to this with you, Brett. But I did want to say
spiritual.
One thing that I do think is that brought me back to church specifically, because I don't think church is the thing that kind of brought me back to Christianity, but church is the thing. Church is tricky because I have a lot of friends right now that they are still in the Christian camp, like still pray, they're Christians by all means, but they do not go to church.
Yeah.
They've been very, very disillusioned with the whole church endeavor. And I would say I was probably in that camp for a little bit, maybe due to the fact that I did it for so long. I was burnt out. Again, probably a whole litany of things. But at some point, I remember coming back. It was probably a few years ago. I came back to church and I was sitting in the auditorium during practice. And I would kind of sneak in during practice and just like hang out and listen to the band. Because I was a big part of the band for so long.
Yeah.
And, that was a huge part of my life. And I love all those people dearly, many of them being my family. And so I'd just sneak in and they'd be playing. And I'd sit down in the center where the bass is just ridiculous. And the lights would be going, the cameras are going, the whole experience is happening. And just having these emotional experiences by myself in that room. And realizing like, man, there is something so interesting here. And then I flash back to youth group days, where you didn't have probably the youth group experience, but I'm sure you can relate that.
I did, because I was a youth pastor for 15 years.
Well, there you go. But I remember kind of going back to the youth group days when I would be leading worship or in the crowd for a concert or a service or whatever, and just that like hair on the back of your neck standing up, and that emotional feeling that you're just like, oh, I'm in the present, and just like this wave of peace and joy and wonder and all that. And I had really been missing. I mean, one of the things that I kept saying was like, I just need to find peace. I need to find some peace. Like, I just feel like I'm constantly not settled. And it was in the auditorium that I started to feel that again. And then I flashed back, and then immediately I'm like, well, that's stupid, because I was just being emotionally manipulated. And, and the big thing growing up in church and in worship was like, this isn't about an emotional experience.
Yeah.
It's not about an emotional experience.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing was set up to manipulate you to have an emotional experience.
True. Yeah.
And to me, like, there was some sort of
all well-meaning when people say that.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't, you're dealing with 20-year-olds that are leading kids. They don't know what they're talking about. Of course it's about an emotional experience.
Yes.
Because that's the same reason you go to a movie. That's the same reason you listen to a good story. That's the same reason you read a book. Like, you're trying to have an emotional experience. And I felt like for the first time I was okay with that. One, because it didn't feel like anybody was manipulating me and telling me it's not about an emotional experience and then giving me one. It was like, here's all the lights, here's all the cameras, here's all the big sound, here's all the music, here's the songs. Like, here it is, everything you can have. And there's something so wonderful about being in that flow state as a participant, and even better, in my opinion, as being a participant in the band standpoint. But not everybody can have that. Sorry. I don't know. I wish everybody could, but, being in the congregation is second best, and I've done that plenty. But I just felt so overwhelmed with like, oh, why would I not come and have this experience? Why would I? It's 1 hour a week, really 30 minutes out of the week that I can come in and I can choose to have this experience or not have this experience.
Yeah.
Nobody's manipulating me and telling me that it's not about that. I'm allowed to just call it what it is and to find out like, what is this thing? Why do I have this draw to it, and why do I feel better when it's over? And so just allowing myself to get out of my head and out of the intellect of the intellectual side of the whole thing, and really just have that experience over and over again, I was like, okay, there's definitely something here.
Which, even from an intellectual standpoint, is simply being true to yourself as a human.
Sure.
Because we're not just intelligent, we are emotional.
Right.
It's part of the package.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No. And so through that, I mean, it really was kind of sitting there in the practices that brought me back to like, okay, there's something beneficial about church. Because I was even okay with like the social aspect, like, hey, you see people you don't see, you keep in contact. Like, obviously that's good. Somebody goes through a hard time, everybody pitches in and helps them out. That's a good thing, like whatever. Hearing a message on the weekend that's positive and trying to give you some inspiration, that's good. But it was like, where do you put this music? Like, what is this whole thing for? That was kind of the last piece. And once that fell into place for me, I was like, oh, I don't care what the words are, whether they're theologically good or bad. I don't care. I don't care about any of that. I really don't even care if the songs are exactly my favorite songs. Like, I care that there is something here happening that you can participate in yeah, maybe you can go and get it at a rock concert, and maybe we used to get it in cathedrals, but this is what we have. This is our generation, our culture's thing that's the closest to a religious experience that we can elicit consistently, and for free, essentially, like just showing up and participating. So yeah, that kind of brought me back into the church thing. So I don't know. I don't know what to do with it, but I'm just trying not to overthink it and just enjoy it.
I notice with myself when on Sundays how hard I have to work at getting to that flow.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm analyzing it, I think it's because, I'll start to feel the emotion. Mm-hmm. And music's a mysterious thing, right?
Super
You've
weird.
heard JP talk about that.
It's crazy.
It's almost like magic,
Yeah.
And so, you can get that at a rock concert. And people feel that. Let's not...
But you can't go to a rock concert every Sunday at 9 a.m.
but you can't do that every Sunday. Exactly. Yeah. So, for free.
Yeah.
But what I think it is... This is just a therapy session for me. I get in there. I want to connect. I want to feel that flow. I want to feel, intellectually, I feel like I'm always connected, so cognitively, no issue there.
Right.
Always connected to God, whatever you want to call that. But I'm also connected to these people, right? And I'm sitting up front because I want to be an encouragement to the band who's trying to connect people. And I'll start to go into flow. And my response is, from my charismatic background, is to raise my hands.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then all of a sudden my flow is broken. And I'm going, what do the people behind me think? Like, do they see that? And they feel pressured.
Right.
So at Encore the other night, I get in the flow. And it's like, hey, everybody that's here at Encore, they came back just to experience this. I'm not going to worry about it, you know?
Yeah.
And wouldn't you know, I turn around and my friend is behind me and she says, I went like this. And I'm like, damn, it did pressure her.
Yeah.
It really did.
Yeah.
That I was raising my hands like that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
So
I remember
it's not easy, it's not simple.
There was, you had your different phases. So in youth group, you'd start with your hands in your pockets, and then they were outside, and then you had the hands up like this. And then eventually it was one of these. And then, when you're really seventh night of camp, your hands are in the air.
Yeah, crying.
I do think there is something, I heard somebody say this, that the awe response that you get when the hair stands up on the back of your neck is the same awe response, or is the same fear response that comes on a cat when they encounter a predator. That the hair, that's the same neurological response. I don't know if this is true, but I like it. Because the whole idea was the cat is trying to make itself look bigger. And so it walks sideways because it's coming into contact with something it doesn't know whether it has to be as big as possible because it's unsure what this thing is, but it's
unsure of the potential of what's coming. And
right.
Yeah.
And so our awe response is a similar thing where our hair stands up, and even that, like whether it was one of the things you were taught as a little kid, but let's say it's not. Let's say there's something in us that puts our hands up and does that. Because, they do that at rock concerts too.
Sure.
And so you put your hands up and you do that whole thing. And and I've heard people say, well, it's, the sign of, humility or whatever.
Vulnerability.
But it's almost a sign of trying to become as big as possible because something bigger than you is coming in and your reflexes are coming on. Like, hey, you need to get big because this thing is awesome.
You just don't know its potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's probably is at least some subconscious connection there.
There's got to be something.
Yeah. I don't consciously feel that. I don't feel afraid. I feel a peace and a presence, but I can see at least subconsciously there's some connection to that because the reality is you don't know the potential of what you're feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
It's interesting. I don't know. So that flow that you're talking about is the same thing that basically keeps me wanting to keep coming back. It's like you're surfing this wave with the whole band together, and then you look out and the congregation starts on that same wave, and you're like, we don't know where this thing is going, and sometimes it just, it kind of fizzles out. And then sometimes it's just, it keeps going, keeps going.
But we can go together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
And I don't know. I feel bad when people have left church completely and they still have their Christianity. And I even tell some of my friends, I'm like, do you ever think maybe you're missing something? That youth group experience you had in worship? Like, you ever wonder if there's something there that you could redeem, you could bring out, and you could experience on a consistent basis and would have some value in your life? And often they're like, well, I haven't thought about it. I'm like, maybe you should.
We were up in North Carolina, real close to where your family goes.
Yeah.
A few weeks back. And up there with some people, that both of us are close to.
Yeah.
And it had gotten circulated somehow. I don't even remember the conversation that it stemmed from, but, well, Brett's upset that, we're deconstructed, but not really reconstructing anything. It's kind of true, to be honest. And so one of them, we went on a walk. Hey, let's go talk,
Yeah.
And in that particular case, they just don't feel like they need that.
Mm.
You might guess who
I'm
talking about, but
sure.
But the others, it's so hard not to say it.
Yeah. Trying to protect some people here.
They were more like, they were more like, I get it, and I should be not throwing everything away,
Yeah.
So everybody's different,
I think those things come with time. I mean, I'm hopeful that with enough time, like, all things are redeemed in some way, because I do think it's a shame to lose all of that and not bring back the good with you.
Yes.
Because it's so deeply tied. Like, you only have one childhood, you only have one upbringing, and just all of that to just completely sever. What's that?
I said
maybe. Yeah. Who knows? But to sever all of that and act like it was all bad is just such a it's such an unnecessary. It creates unnecessary suffering where there could be potential for redemption and beauty, and I don't know. But you also can't force that.
No, that's right.
And it doesn't matter whether.
And I didn't intend to.
Right.
I thought it was weird that it even got around. Like, who did I talk to?
Well, I mean, the reality is, like, you care about people.
Yeah.
And you don't want to see anybody not.
I don't want to see them experiencing unnecessary suffering.
That's it.
And missing out on possible redemption of things, because that is a unique experience. It's a valuable experience, and
there's a way to do it. And I think that's
a way to do it. Yeah,
but it's a lot. It's a lot to ask of, because a lot of people they leave things and they just go,
I just can't.
I can't. I'm not. I don't have the care, or life's good enough. Like, I don't really need this thing.
Especially, I noticed that, especially with people that aren't. They're not deconstructed to the point of they're atheistic or anything. I just can't do church. I just can't do church like you were describing. And I do. I get it. I've wrestled with that for years, and only probably in the last couple of years for me, I'm like, no, you know what? I see some redeemed purpose here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always believed in Suncoast.
Yeah.
And its approach to things and the community that's involved and all the things that you mentioned, but. I do get why people just look at it and go, I don't need that. And maybe even need to not need it for a while, at least for a while. I do. So let's just wrap this up with, if you see somebody who has gone through demolition, okay, and their walls crumbled around them, they're covered in ash, they're just miserable, they feel dirty, all those feelings that come with, stepping away from things that were such an integral part of your identity. If there was something that you could give them, if that somebody is listening, what would it be? It's a big ask, I know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard because my knee jerk is like, you should read this book. Or you should, listen to this podcast, or go on this trail. And
some have said that.
Yeah.
Listen to these podcasts. Listen to people's stories,
Well, I think there's definitely something to that. But I think the first thing would be, like, try to evaluate your life and whether it's what you want. And try to step back a few feet and try to take some perspective and say, like, is what I'm doing serving me? Is what I'm believing serving me? Is there something that, if I could check my intelligence for a second and I could believe something that I used to believe, would I have a better life? Would I have a better outlook? Would I be less nihilistic? Would I be more hopeful? Would I have more joy? Would I have more connection? And then if that thing is something that you can rectify intellectually, rectify it. Do the work. Because a lot of those things in your life that are negative, whether it be that nihilism or whatever, they can be rectified with some of those religious bricks that have been left behind. But some of those bricks, you have to then go and do some intellectual work and be like, okay, I can't just accept this thing as is. I'm going to have to talk to people. I'm going to have to ask these questions. I'm going to have to listen. I'm going to have to exercise.
And there's a lot of resources out there that can help you do that.
100%.
Yeah.
And I don't recommend, I'm not somebody that's like, oh, I recommend everybody try to challenge their faith consistently. I don't know if that's a good place to be either. So maybe try to keep the tension between what you have and what it could be, rather than just getting rid of all of it all at once.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Keep the tension between what you have and what it could be.
Yes.
That's good, man. I like that. I'm going to steal it.
I probably stole it from someone else.
Yeah. Probably.
Realistically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a pretty smart guy, though.
Oh, go on.
Well, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, man.
I appreciate you.